The collapse of the American dream. The United States is frequently described as an immigrant nation. Large waves of immigrants from many different backgrounds have assimilated into American society throughout its history, with little interference from federal or state governmental laws. But how are new Americans faring given the significant changes in the makeup and volume of migrant flows as well as the current economic climate? Is America still the finest country to live and work in? Hello and welcome to our channel. We'll be talking about how the rest of the world doesn't see America anymore as a good place to migrate. America's official jobless rate has plummeted to a startlingly low 3.8%. By the end of the year, the Federal Reserve predicts that the unemployment rate will rise to 3.5%. However, the official rate conceals more alarming facts, such as the hordes of college graduates who are overqualified for their positions, the rise of contract workers who lack job security, and the army of part-timers who are in desperate need of full-time employment. Nearly 80% of Americans claim to live paycheck to paycheck, many of whom are unsure of the size of their upcoming paycheck. Stable pay and disappearing employment benefits cover all of this. When adjusted for inflation, the average American worker currently makes about $44,500 per year, which isn't much more than they did 40 years ago. Although the U.S. economy is still expanding, a small number of top executives from huge corporations, financiers, and creators and owners of digital devices have been reaping the majority of the benefits. There isn't a jobs problem in America. A good jobs crisis is present. Republicans projected a significant salary increase for American workers when they passed their $1.5 trillion tax reduction last December. Ignore it. In fact, wages fell in this year's second quarter. Employers are not being forced to boost pay by anything, not even the current low unemployment rate. Compare this to the late 1990s, the last time unemployment decreased to a level similar to that of now, when 3% points more of national income went to wages than it does now. What's happening? Simply speaking, almost all American workers have significantly reduced negotiating leverage. One of the most significant economic storylines of the last 40 years has been the loss of that bargaining power, but it has less to do with supply and demand than it does with institutions and politics. The U.S. economy's structure has been altered by two fundamental dynamics, which have a direct impact on how much power is distributed between business and labor. The first is that workers are finding it harder and harder to form unions. The second is the ease with which businesses might band together to form oligopolies or monopolies. More than a third of all American workers in the private sector were unionized by the middle of the 1950s. Later, organized public employees emerged as well. Not only were employers compelled by law to permit unions, but also to engage in good faith negotiations with them. Workers now had a powerful voice to request improved pay, benefits, working conditions, and hours. But since the 1980s, private sector employers have waged an increasingly ferocious war against unions. Ronald Reagan sent a message to private sector employers that it was acceptable to oppose unions when he fired the country's air traffic controllers for engaging in an illegal strike. Employers were forced to adopt extreme measures to enhance shareholder returns as a result of a wave of hostile takeovers. They introduced the age of union busting together. Employers have been terminating staff members who attempt to organize, threatening to leave the state for one that is more business-friendly if firms unionize, running campaigns to defeat union elections, and calling in replacement staff when unionized workers go on strike. Employer organizations have pushed for more right-to-work laws in states, which prevent unions from demanding dues from the employees they represent. The right-to-work principle has been extended to include public employees, according to a recent Supreme Court opinion written by the court's 5 Republican appointees. Less than 7% of workers in the commercial sector are currently immunized, and public employee unions are in dire danger due in large part to the highest court decision. Since the late 1960s, the percentage of U.S. income that has gone to the middle, which is defined as being 50% above and 50% below the median, has decreased, and this reduction in unionization is closely correlated with it. The percentage of total wealth flowing to the richest 10% of Americans during the past century is almost perfectly inversely connected to the percentage of unionized workers in the country, which is maybe even more significant. Most American workers now have little or no input in how the pie is divided. Antitrust enforcement has ceased within the same time period. The U.S. government has essentially given the go-ahead to businesses hoping to gain monopoly control over digital platforms and networks like Google, Apple, Amazon, and Facebook, merge into massive oligopolies like pharmaceuticals, health insurers, airlines, seed producers, food processors, military contractors, Wall Street banks, and internet service providers, or aim to establish local monopolies like those in the food distribution, waste disposal, and healthcare industries. This indicates that employees are spending more on these goods and services than they would have if these marketplaces were more competitive. It exactly resembles cutting their wages. Because workers have fewer employer options due to a concentration of economic power, firms have more capacity to keep wages low. Additionally, it has permitted employers to impose on workers clauses like anti-poaching and obligatory arbitration agreements that further reduce their ability to bargain. Although immigrants are more likely to be employed in the U.S. than in other nations, having a job is not always a guarantee of a comfortable lifestyle. In 2012, 37% of Americans who were living in immigrant households were relative poor, which is defined as having an income that was less than 60% of the median equalized disposable income. This is 4.5 percentage points more than the OECD average and 14 percentage points greater than Americans who were born in the U.S. Nearly 47% of low-educated immigrant employees in the United States are considered to be relatively poor, while in-work poverty is at 26% in the country. Even more startling is the fact that more than half, 52%, of children living in immigrant households are poor, which is a difference of 20 percentage points from native-born households and a difference of 12 percentage points from children living in immigrant households in Europe. In terms of international comparison, the educational outcomes of immigrant children, regardless of where they were born in the United States or abroad, tend to be favorable. According to the OECD Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, foreign-born students' reading abilities at the age of 15 are slightly inferior to those of U.S. native-born students by about 20 points or less than half a year of schooling, but they perform better than immigrant students in EU OECD countries, where the difference with the native-born is of 40 points. In theory, immigrants who meet all other qualifying conditions might become citizens of the U.S. after 5 years of lawful permanent residence or 3 years for spouses of citizens, although only 60% of those who were born abroad become citizens after 10 years of residence. Although several other nations have stricter requirements for naturalization, this is lower than the OECD average. After 10 years, 92% of foreign-born Canadians and 83% of foreign-born Australians become citizens. Only 34% of low-educated immigrants from low-income countries are U.S. citizens after 10 years, which is particularly startling to note. It's possible that many of them are ineligible for naturalization. However, even individuals who are most likely to qualify, highly educated immigrants and citizens of wealthy nations, have rates that are substantially lower than in Australia or Canada. Policymakers may want to think about how to allow immigrants who fully satisfy the conditions to complete their integration with citizenship, while taking into account the economic benefits of naturalization. OECD 2011, for example. America's transition from the farm to the factory was followed by decades of violent labor unrest. Another social disruption was caused by the transition from industry to office work and other sedentary jobs. A more regrettable and, I think, more long-lasting effect of the more recent transfer of bargaining power from employees to major businesses is an enraged working class that is more susceptible to demagogues that promote authoritarianism, racism, and xenophobia. With this, we conclude our video. We appreciate you helping us keep it going by watching. The best way to support our channel is to watch another episode. Thank you for tuning in. To ensure that you never miss an episode, please subscribe to the channel.